On today's final division preview on Locked On NHL, we tackle the Metropolitan Division, which doesn't look as good as recent seasons.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Locked On NHL. I'm Nick Zararis, the host of Locked On Oilers. That is Hunter Hodies, one of the hosts of Locked On Penguins. We want to thank everyone who's making Locked On NHL their first listen of the day. Locked On NHL, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, where you can place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So on today's edition of Locked On NHL, we are going to tackle the Metropolitan Division. We are going to power rank the Metro based on our preseason expectations. So we're going to get right on into it because these episodes have a tendency of running long because we do get sidetracked and there are a lot of threads to pull on. Hunter and I both have the Columbus Blue Jackets 8th in our power rankings, and we want to be mindful of the situation in Columbus and be respectful and frame this conversation a little bit differently than the tenor of the next 7 teams we're going to talk about. So Columbus is a interesting team in that they have several young players. I am very excited to see how they play this year. Someone like Adam Fantilli, who was having a very strong rookie campaign before he got hurt last year. You still have Kent Johnston. You still have Cole Sillinger. You have Kirill Marchenko. You have a veteran defensive core. You have a veteran head coach in there now to kind of provide stability after the last few seasons of tumult. And sports have a weird way of bringing people together and bringing the best out of people. You think about how Vegas played in their inaugural season, right after that mass shooting in Vegas, where even though the team might not be that talented, the external factors might be able to push them. And I genuinely do think they have the ability to be a little bit better than this. It would not be that surprising if they ended up finishing ahead of the Flyers, to me, in all honesty.
Yeah, I think the Blue Jackets, I still think with their young talent, they are heading in the right direction. And just to echo your thoughts as well, Nick, yeah, I mean, we both still very much send our heartfelt condolences to the Blue Jackets, the Flames, and just the entire NHL community for the loss of Johnny and Matthew Gaudreau. But in terms of the Blue Jackets, I agree about Fantilli. I think for a full year with him, that's going to be great. Same with Cole Sillinger. I actually really like Marchenko. He was healthy scratched a bit last season for some reason, but I feel like he is one of their best wingers overall. I'm glad that he's going to be at least be starting the season on the top line next to Sean Monahan and Boone Jenner. Also a big thing for Columbus, Nick, the health of Zach Werenski. I think when he is healthy, he is one of the more underrated defensemen in this league. Very good top pairing defenseman. He's got to stay healthy if this team has a shot of maybe being a bit better this year compared to last year. And then you said about Dean Evason. I felt like he did a really good job in Minnesota with what he had. Now, Columbus gets a veteran coach. I do feel like he could have them playing a bit better this year overall. And also in goal, Elvis Merzlikins. I think you could see a bit of a better season from him. I do think there is a better goalie in there than what we've seen, I feel like, the last season or two.
We've seen decent spurts of an NHL goalie from Merzlikins. Yeah. It's really just a matter of finding a level of consistency. And as we know, goalie's really a product of environment, and that's been a difficult defensive environment for a few seasons now, where even though they have a talented forward group, they're not necessarily the most defensively inclined, and that bleeds over into the overall team defensive philosophy and has made it a challenge. But yeah, I'm very curious to see what year 2 of Fantilli looks like, somebody who destroyed college hockey his draft year and somebody who looked like they were getting up to speed and then he got hurt. So somebody I'm very curious about. Number 7, we both have the Flyers in that slot as well. The Flyers are going in the right direction, but my caveat is I don't necessarily love all of their roster decisions. I'm not quite sure that John Tortorella is the best coach for the long-term trajectory of the organization. The way the Cutter Gauthier situation was handled gives me a bit of pause as regards to how the front office handles difficult situations. The stuff with trying to get their goalie over from Russia was weird this offseason as well. So I'm not ready to say I'm bearish on the Flyers rebuilding prospects, but I definitely have a bit more pause about them than even like Columbus, who I don't think is doing an amazing job, but is definitely trending in the right direction. Whereas the Flyers, I don't want to say I'm worried, but it does seem like there's a bit more going on here than just the typical accumulation of young guys.
Everything went right for the Flyers last year up until those final couple of weeks when it looked like they just totally ran out of gas. I mean, you could tell those last couple of weeks, they exhausted everything out of that season, and then they just collapsed just because I felt like they just really couldn't do much anymore. So I'm curious to see if they're able to replicate that for this season and if they're able to finish stronger again. In my opinion, I don't think they're going to be able to, even with the addition of Matt Michkov, And speaking of that, Nick, how do you expect him to be this season? Because I do expect him, at least for the long haul, to be a very good player in this league. This is a player that the Flyers have needed, I think, for quite some time. But I just want to get your thoughts. How do you think he's going to fare in the NHL?
I don't know, because I don't know if he fits what the Flyers want to do. The Flyers turned every game into a rock fight last year by turning them into dump and cycle fests and forcing every game to be tight and low scoring, where somebody like that, who has flourished to their game, who has some inherent playmaking ability, is just fundamentally discouraged by a John Tortorella system. And look, I've been coached by John Tortorella. My favorite team's been coached by John Tortorella for a period of time in my life. I understand you get the short-term results. He pushes guys along. If the Flyers are going to eventually make that leap into being a good team again, I don't think it will be with Tortorella as the head coach, just based on how basically since he left Tampa Bay, that's been his MO of pushing a team a little bit further along, getting them ready, and then the next guy is typically the guy that makes that leap, with the exception of Vancouver, where it didn't go very well for him in Vancouver. That only lasted one season. Number 6, this is where our lists start to deviate. I have the Pittsburgh Penguins at number 6, and it's mostly because I just don't know, man. There is a lot of uncertainty on this roster. I still don't know exactly what it's going to shake out looking like. I know they weren't able to do as much as they probably would have liked to this offseason as far as improving the roster. But you got Sid, you got Malkin, and as much flack as Malkin gets from some people, Malkin is still one of the 5 or 6 best second-line centers in hockey. You've still got Letang, you've got Carlson. Tristan Jarry is a fine regular season goalie. Marcus Peterson is very underrated, one of the more underrated defensemen in the NHL. I just want to see from the Penguins, can they put it together? And we talked about this a lot during the season last year. Mike Sullivan is a good coach, but it might just be time for a change of anything to try and spark something. You know, the Penguins haven't won a playoff series in 7 years, something like that. It's been a while. So for them, I don't even think it's necessarily about going on a deep playoff run. I just think it's about putting together a coherent full season, making the playoffs, and then being competitive. I mean, they're not that far removed from having the Rangers on the ropes in a first-round playoff series. There's talent here. It's just it hasn't gelled and it hasn't clicked for them for a while now.
They were robbed, I felt like, of a potential big playoff run that year. I feel like if they had gotten past the Rangers, they could have potentially beaten Carolina and gone to the conference final and maybe would have had one more last deep run in them in the Sid Gino era. But I think at this point, the odds of them going on another deep run are pretty slim overall. But just real quick to backtrack to the Flyers, I don't feel like I gave them enough time, but I like Sean Couturier coming back when he's fully healthy, one of the top 2-line centers in the league. I like Konechny as a goal scorer. Cam York on the top pairing. I think he's going to continue to grow in his role. My only big thing is Sam Ersson ready for being a number 1 goaltender? I kind of have some questions about that overall, but I still feel like the Flyers are probably going to be more involved in the race this year in terms of making the playoffs. Number 6 for me, I have the Washington Capitals, though. I felt I was going back and forth between the Penguins and the Capitals for so long, just because these two teams are kind of just mirror images of one another with how they were contending at the same time. Now they're on, the downward slope of just not being contenders anymore and trying to balance, doing a retool while also trying to make the playoffs, right? The Capitals, they are very much in a retool on the fly / rebuild on the fly stage, but they're also adding pieces to the roster to help Alex Ovechkin get the goal record, which he has a very good chance of getting this season. I really like the trade for Andrew Mangiapane. I think he can definitely score 20 to 25 goals, especially on a line with Ovechkin. The Dubois trade, that is the big one. It's really risky. I don't know if it's going to work out. I understand getting rid of Kemper because he didn't work out in Washington, but getting Dubois after what he did in LA this past season, what he's done before he was in LA, I'm skeptical, to be honest. I really don't see that working out. I would love to be wrong, but I really don't see it. Tom Wilson, he's still good for 20 to 30 goals overall. Defensively, I really like the Jacob Chikrin trade. He's a good top pairing defenseman for this year and for years to come. Pairing him with John Carlson makes all the sense in the world. I like Rasmus Sandin quite a bit. Matt Roy is also pretty good. They have the makings of a pretty solid defensive group there. And then in goal, they do have Charlie Lindgren, but I still got to see that again. Last year he was good, but I got to see him do it again there. For Washington, though, I'm just still not sure when I look at their forwards. Outside of a few guys, they have enough to score during the regular season to make the playoffs. I know we all said that last year. You looked at their goal differential, which was not
they didn't
good.
Score enough to make the playoffs. They made the playoffs because of their goaltending. They had negative 38 goal differential, 37, something like that. They didn't score enough. Factually, they didn't.
Yeah, and I foresee the same problem this year in terms of goal scoring. I got to see Lindgren do this again before I pick them to make the playoffs, I think.
All right, so I'm going to talk about Washington when we come back from the break, and we'll keep our lists on moving here on today's edition of Locked On NHL. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more. On the same page where you place your bets, you can get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. In the NFL this week, the Falcons are taking on the Bucs tonight on Thursday Night Football. The Falcons 1.5-point home favorites. For the early riser crowd, the Jets and Vikings playing over in London. The Vikings 2.5-point favorites on a neutral field. Best game of the weekend, though, in my opinion, two-time NFL MVP Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens going to Cincinnati to take on the Bengals. The Ravens 2.5-point road favorites. And then sneaky good game, Bills and Texans, Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs. The revenge game, the Bills 1.5-point road favorites going down to Houston. So head on over to FanDuel.com to get started. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this edition of Locked On NHL, where we are power ranking the Metropolitan Division ahead of the 2024-2025 NHL season. I have Washington slightly ahead of Pittsburgh, and like you said, you could go either way on this. My argument for Washington is that I understand what they're trying to do, and I think their vision is a bit more linear and straightforward than what Pittsburgh's is, because at this point, Pittsburgh is trying to find the right supporting cast for Sid, for Malkin, for Letang, for Carlson, whereas Washington is really kind of trying to find a middle ground and just get talent. It's not even like, does the talent fit? They're just trying to acquire as much talent as they possibly can to be ready for what the next wave is, because I would not be shocked if Ovechkin breaks the goal scoring record this year. He needs 42. It's not out of the question he could score 42 this year. He still finished with 30, even though he had 8 at the All-Star break last year. It is not out of the question for him to retire after this year. If he breaks the record, I think it is perfectly reasonable to say he's done. I think if he scores 43 goals, there's nothing left to play for. They're not in a window of contention. They are not a team blossoming with young talent. They have some pieces I like, some of their young guys. I like Connor McMichael. Been waiting for Hendrik Claude-Pierre to get more of a look, but you've got them. You've got the one Protas brother. You've got Dylan Strome. You've got interesting pieces. Mangiapane, you mentioned. Jacob Chikrin, they acquired as well. They signed Matt Roy from the Kings, who was a very good defensive defenseman, and they finally have what looks to be a reasonably passable top 4. My big question for them is goaltending. Charlie Lindgren probably won't be able to be a 920 goalie again. If he's a 910 goalie, I think they can finish ahead of Pittsburgh, ahead of Philly, ahead of Columbus. And that's not a very high bar, but for the talent Washington has, and I'll finish with this point before we move along. When I look at Washington on paper, I think if you dropped everybody down one line in one pair and they had better players ahead of them, they would be a good team. Going into that first round series against the Rangers last year, that's what I said. This looks like a team that's missing a first line, because they were missing a first line. They don't have first line talent of a good team anymore. They don't. Ovechkin's old. He's only given it to you one way, and he's not really creating offense other than just getting to his spot and waiting for his shot. So
and Dylan
Washington
Strome is also a really good second line center, but he's not a first line center.
No, he's not. He's not. I completely wholeheartedly agree with you. And I'm somebody who was pounding the table 2 summers ago for any team to take a flyer on him because he was cheap. He was coming off of a down year. And most importantly, he had room to grow still. He needed opportunity. And Washington has done a reasonable enough job of that. You mentioned Dubois. I like the trade purely on principle because your team's probably going to be mediocre or bad anyway. And if Dubois locks in and is effective again, all right, you got a first line center. If he doesn't, you're bad anyway. So if from a risk assessment perspective, it makes sense. You know, the Capitals are not that far away from going into a really prolonged figure out what we are. Same thing with Pittsburgh. You know, Pittsburgh's 2 years away from that.
Right. And I do have, speaking of the Penguins, I have them 5th here in the Metro. I have them kind of as a bubble team yet again this year. Though if I had to make a prediction right now, I do have the Penguins missing the playoffs by a few points again, just similar with Washington overall with the Penguins. The reason why I do have them ahead of Washington for this year is mainly because of the play of Crosby from this past season. Yes, I understand the Capitals finished ahead of the Penguins this past season, but I feel like Crosby, with how, I guess, motivated he's going to be after these last 2 seasons of no playoffs, I feel like he's going to be even better this year. He had 94 points last year on a team that had one of the worst power plays in hockey. I think he'll have a chance to hit 100 plus this year if the power play is even average. I also think Erik Karlsson is going to be a lot better this year. I felt like last year, for a good chunk of the year, he was good, but wasn't at the level that we saw to end the season. If the Penguins can get that level of Erik Karlsson for a full season, they will very much be in the race at least this year. Not saying they're going to get in, but I think they're going to be in the race. Evgeny Malkin, I'm glad you gave him his flowers. He is still one of the best second-line centers in the league, had almost 70 points last year, Nick, and he played on a line with Riley Smith, who wasn't that good, and also with Rickard Rakell, who was a ghost for a lot of the season as well. It only happened when Michael Bunting came into the fray that line really started to take off overall. But for this year, they took on a lot of reclamation projects. You got Kevin Hayes in there from the Blues. They're hoping that he can be a bit better on the third line. They took on Anthony Beauvillier. They're hoping after a pretty rough year last year, he can get back to the form that he had with the Islanders. They signed Matt Grzelcyk away from the Bruins. They're hoping after kind of a bad year last year that he can regain some of his really good form that he had a couple of years ago. I mean, a few years ago, Nick, I was saying that he was one of the better defensemen in the league, especially in his own zone. But these last couple of years, it's just kind of gone downhill a little bit. The Penguins, though, they're trying to balance the 2 things at once. A, they're doing this retool/rebuild on the fly. And B, they are at least, I think, trying to sneak into the playoffs at least one more time during this era to give Crosby, Malkin, Letang, and Karlsson a shot at maybe one more deep run. Again, I don't think they're going to get in the playoffs this year, but would it surprise me if they did? No, just because this core, I still think, even though they're a bit older, is very good. It's all going to come down to the supporting cast, which is what I think I've been saying for the last couple of years now.
All right, so we both have the Islanders in this next spot, so we can wrap up with the Islanders, and then we'll do the top 3 in our final segment. The argument for the Islanders is very straightforward. They were very bad for the first 3 months of the season. They blew so many 2 and 3 goal leads down the stretch. They changed coaches. The defense got better. They got to sort out the goalie situation. Sorokin had off-season surgery. Need to know what level of goalie Sorokin's going to be able to be physically this year. But the Islanders have enough talent to be competitive. They will be annoying. They will be in a lot of games. They have enough forward talent where Horvat, Barzal, and Anthony Duclair has the makings of a really good first line. Brock Nelson is in the midst of maybe the most underrated mid-30s career renaissance in the entire NHL, somebody whose game has really, really evolved as he's gotten older. Kyle Palmieri had 20 goals for them, even as old as he is last year. And they're overhauling their bottom 6 gradually and slowly. You know, their only holdover from the old identity line is Casey Cizikas, Matt Martin, and Cal Clutterbuck, neither with the team anymore. My only real issue with the Islanders, and this isn't a secret, they don't score enough. You know, right. They don't have enough scoring depth. And it puts a lot more pressure on their defense to be perfect. And that's the issue. When your expectation for your defense is perfection, it is hard to be effective. You know, in theory, Dobson was great last year. I am still not nearly as bullish on Romanov as most Islander fans are. I just don't really see it. His mobility really gives me pause. I know He's a larger guy, so there's a bit of trade-off there for size versus mobility, but he doesn't really move like a first pair lefty. That second pair of Pulock and Pelech hasn't really been the same because of the injuries over the years. Both of them pretty extensive injury histories. And until I have clarity on their goaltending, I'm going to be a lot lower on them than I would have been, say, we were talking about them last year. Coming into last year, I thought they were going to be a lot better. I thought they were going to be pretty good. And they did ultimately make the playoffs. They won 2 games in the first round against Carolina, but there will be a good regular season team, but once they get to a first round playoff series, they're probably not going to have the goal scoring, which has been the case each of the last 2 years when they've made the playoffs.
Right. I think they're good enough to get in the playoffs, but I don't think they're good enough, Nick, to beat, even though Carolina's lost a lot of players this past offseason. I don't think they're still good enough to beat Carolina. I don't think they can beat the Rangers, for example, in a playoff series, New Jersey, one of the top teams from the Atlantic. I still feel like their ceiling right now, at least for me, is a team that just gets bounced in the first round. The biggest thing, you said it, they don't score enough. I mean, I like Matt Barzal. He is a game breaker with the puck on his stick. I could watch him for days. Brock Nelson, also a really good goal scorer. Anthony Duclair, that was a really good offseason signing by Lou Lamoriello. That's probably one of the better free agent signings overall, in my opinion. Bo Horvat, it's a long contract, but he's provided them really good value ever since being traded to Long Island. Kyle Palmieri, even though he's a bit older, he is still producing. You have Anders Lee, who is still, I feel like, one of the better net front presences in the league. He loves cleaning up the garbage around that area. I think Noah Dobson on the back end is going to have another really good year. He's going to be in that Norris conversation, I feel like, for quite a while. He may not win one just because when healthy, Cale Makar is better. When healthy, Adam Fox, I think, is better. Quinn Hughes. But I still feel like he's going to be in that conversation overall. Pelech and Pulock, that pairing used to be very, very good. It's kind of slipped a little bit in recent years, I think, Nick, where they're still, I feel like, effective players, but they're not as good as they used to be, at least for me, in my opinion. Goaltending, I mean, do they get the bounce back from Sorokin? That's the biggest thing for me with this team. He wasn't good last year. Varlamov had to carry a lot of the load. Is he able to do that again despite being another year older? I'm curious to see. I mean, the Islanders have had pretty solid goaltending these last few years now. I'm curious to see if that continues this year. And also, how do they play for a full season under Patrick Waugh? I liked some of the things that he did after taking over. I felt like they were a bit better defensively. Is he able to carry that over for a full season? That's going to be the big thing for me with the Islanders as well. Right now, I think I have them making the playoffs, but I don't really have them doing that much damage. I feel like the Islanders overall just kind of need to pick a direction of where they want to go instead of just being stuck in the middle. But that's also just me.
That's very fair. We're going to take our final break on today's show. We're going to come back. We'll hit the top 3 and send you guys into the weekend. So getting on into it, the argument, and we're going to do these two together because this is the last place where Hunter and I have deviation. I have Devils, Carolina. Hunter has Carolina Devils. I'm going to make the argument for Carolina very, very nastily because it's not an argument I feel great about, but they lost a lot of talent, but they have consistently proven they are a really good regular season team because no player is more important than the system. And the Hurricanes are a very effective regular season team because they're a buzzsaw in the regular season. They're persistent forechecking, their heavy cycle game. It wears teams down. And against most teams, most nights, they don't have, most of the time when you play Carolina, most of the teams they play, they don't have the discipline to break out against that cycle, against that forecheck. And because of that, Carolina is able to make do with less talented players. They are going to be able to make do. And look, I understand. You lose a Gensel, you lose a Shea, you lose Pesci all in one offseason. There's going to be some turnover. I like some of the things they did. Sean Walker's an interesting idea. They are going to be hinging a lot on their young guys continuing to take steps, whether that's Jack Drury, whether that's Seth Jarvis. Those two guys are going to need to really make some plays. Their goaltending, as always, doesn't look great on paper, but somehow they're going to get to the playoffs with 9-10 goaltending, and then they'll get to the playoffs and they'll play a team that's better than them and they'll lose. You know, that Carolina is, and I'll make this point later when we talk about the Rangers. Carolina is a poor man's Rangers. They are a very good regular season team, but when they get to the playoffs and they have to play a team that's better than them, they don't have the means of breaking through against a better team. For the Rangers, it's because of their style of play. For Carolina, they don't have the high-end talent. And maybe Seth Jarvis gets there. I think Seth Jarvis is probably the highest ceiling player on that team, but I don't necessarily think Carolina is cup good. I think they're absolutely a playoff team. I have them ahead of the Devils. And real quick on the Devils, I just think when you have this much turnover in one offseason, it's going to take a little while for everything to stick. You know, you got 3 new defensemen because it looks like Seamus Casey's going to make the team out of camp. He's an interesting defensive prospect I'm high on. Sheldon Keefe, new coach. Your bottom 6 is not as deep as it was 2 years ago when you won a playoff series against the Rangers. Your top 6 is great on paper, but as we've talked about all summer, until I see Jack Hughes play 75 plus games, Nico Hischier 75 plus games, Dougie Hamilton 75 plus games, I am going to be very weary because the Devils are an injury prone team and they have had a lot of turnover, and it's hard. When you turn over that much of your roster in one offseason, it is hard to hit the ground running. I think they're going to win a lot of games. They're going to be a playoff team, but I would not be surprised if they come out of the gate very slowly.
I think those are all fair points. With Carolina, for me, being number 3 in my power rankings, it is mainly because of the players that they lost, and also just you look at that forward group overall. It's still, again, missing another true big game breaker. You know, Svechnikov, I like quite a bit. I love Sebastian Aho. Seth Jarvis, I think, can become an even better player. I am also a bit higher than most on Marty Necas, but I still feel like overall, when you look up and down this forward group, it could use another game breaker or 2 overall. The quantity over quality style that they have during the regular season, it works over 82 games, but it doesn't work in the playoffs, especially when you get to go up against a team for at most 7 games. Teams that are well coached will adjust to that, because Carolina, they fire a lot of those shots from the point. They look for the deflections, but they're not a team that is just going to, get to the slot, 10, 15 feet out, bury their chances that way. They're very much a team that, again, they fire a lot of shots from the point. They look for deflections. Boom. That's really a lot of what their offense is, along with, forechecking down low, getting the puck to the point, and all that good stuff. I do think Rod Brind'Amour is a very good coach. He will get this team in the playoffs. I just don't think right now they have the horses to make another deep run. They're going to have to go out at the deadline again if they want to be all in and get another score or 2 if this team really wants to go deep in the playoffs. Also, their goaltending kind of still scares me, Nick. I'm sorry. Freddie Anderson, especially that sell job that he had against the Rangers in Game 6 this past year, not good, to say the least, brother.
Go back and watch the goals. If you're listening to this podcast right now and you don't remember the first goal the Rangers scored in their third period comeback in Game 6 of the second round, Freddie Anderson is on his back and the puck hasn't been shot yet, which I still don't understand how that happens, but continue. Yes, Hall of Fame sell job.
Yeah, I'm not really sold on him for a full season. He's got to stay healthy. Kochetkov is also, I guess, fine. They're going to have to get by with that tandem unless they go out there and get someone else. But still, it doesn't give me a lot of confidence. I mean, I love Jacob Slavin on the back end. He is one of the best defensemen in the league. I feel like Brent Burns is still very good as well. I like Orlov as well as the number 3. You bring in Shane Gostisbehere. I think he's a really good player, at least on a bottom pairing role. He can give you power play 2 minutes as well. But I feel like for Carolina, I don't see them being as good as the Devils and the Rangers, because the Devils and Rangers high-end talent is better. And speaking of the Devils, I do have them number 2 for this division. I am banking on Jack Hughes to have a fully healthy season. I understand the reservations. They are totally valid considering he hasn't been able to stay healthy at times. But when he is healthy, this kid is a game breaker, and I am hoping that he does stay healthy this year. If he does, this team is a Stanley Cup contender. Same thing with Nico Hischier. He is one of the 3 best two-way forwards in the league. He stays healthy. He is going to frustrate the hell out of a lot of teams' top players when the Devils play on a nightly basis. Timo Meier, really good scorer on the top line. I really like Jesper Bratt, obviously, as well. They brought back Tomas Tatar, which I felt like was interesting. You have Andre Palat on the third-line role, which I like. But also, getting Dougie Hamilton back, man, that is going to be such a game changer for the Devils. They really missed his offense from the back end, and just honestly, his overall play from the back end. He is right on the cusp, I feel like, of being a top 10 defenseman in this league. With him back healthy, this team also, I feel like, turns into a contender. And it feels like hopefully they fix their goalie situation with Jacob Markstrom coming in, Jake Allen as his backup. If Markstrom is able to play, 9-10, 9-15, that is going to be big for the Devils this year. I have them as a Stanley Cup contender, and I have them number 2 in this division, but we have the same team at number 1 in the Rangers. And Nick, I know you host Liberty Blue with Andrew. I'm going to let you cook on the Rangers.
It's real straightforward. This is it. Shesterkin's last year of being cheap. You're looking down the barrel of Lafreniere and Keandre Miller extensions. Even if you trade Trouba next summer, you're not going to have enough money to pay for everything with just trading him. And that's if you get someone to take his full salary, which you're probably not going to be able to do. This is the best Rangers team on paper going into a season, maybe since the team that won the President's Trophy in 2014, 2015, where they were playing Lee Stempniak on the fourth line. I think the injuries early on are going to be a challenge because it's going to come down to whether or not Laviolette can trust Keandre Miller to play with Fox. And if Trouba sinks whoever he's with, they're going to go back to Miller with Trouba. The Rangers are going to win a lot of regular season games. That's their MO. They've got high-end talent. They keep every game close. They score enough goals to get by. They're passable at 5-on-5. They're elite on special teams. Their high-end players beat other teams' high-end players. The Rangers' only flaw is when they play a team whose high-end guys are better, they lose. That goes back to 10, 15 years ago. They couldn't beat Tampa Bay in 2015 because Tampa Bay's high-end guys were better. They couldn't beat the Kings in 14 because those guys were better. They couldn't beat the Bruins in 13 because the Bruins guys were better. In 12, they couldn't beat the Devils because the Devils' high-end guys were better. 3 years ago, they couldn't beat Tampa. 2 years ago, they couldn't beat the Devils. This past season, they couldn't beat Florida. When the other team has better high-end players, the Rangers guys they can't win. The Rangers can't win. Now, they've got a good third line. That's something they haven't had going into a season. That's usually something they've had to build. But they're going to win a lot of games. The argument for the Rangers, if you want to bowl one, everyone else in the conference and arguably the division other than the Devils got worse. Everybody else lost people, and that helps. You don't want to see Florida in the playoffs. But other than that, Rangers are going to have a good season.
Yeah, no, this team, in my opinion at least, they should finish first in the Metro, and they are a bona fide Stanley Cup contender. My worry is, will the big guns show up in the playoffs? I feel like that is a very fair point to make considering these last couple of years. It feels like at times Panarin kind of goes into a ghost, I feel like, for a few games. Same thing with Zibanejad, especially when he plays someone like a Barkov or a Crosby. It feels like he just gets shut down in quite a few games. So I feel like the matchup has to be there for Zibanejad if the Rangers want to go far. I feel like this could be a big year for Alexis Lafreniere. He really broke out last year. He could be looking at an even bigger breakout year this year, considering what he did last year. Shesterkin, I mean, he's about to reset the goalie market. Him and Swayman are honestly about to do it. I think Shesterkin obviously is going to do it a lot more, considering I think he's the best goaltender on the planet. But this is the last year you have with him before he makes double digits. And I'm talking, 10, 11, potentially 12 million plus overall on this next long-term contract. This is also probably the last year for Jacob Trouba as a Rangers captain. I feel like they're probably going to move him out after this year, no matter what happens. And they just got to find a way to shelter him. I feel like at this point, you can't have him play with Keandre Miller, for example. That pairing has a long history of not working. The underlying numbers are really piss poor. But you look up and down this lineup, it's a very deep team. In my opinion, I think defensively, they didn't do too much there over the offseason, but I still feel like it's at least good enough to get by, especially when Adam Fox is healthy. It's going to come down to how do their top players play in the playoffs, and can Peter Laviolette get enough offense out of this team to go far in the playoffs? As Laviolette's tenures go by, his teams get less and less offense. I'm curious to see if that trend breaks this year. But the Rangers, they should win this division. They should very much be in the conversation for a contender. In my opinion, they are a contender. It's a matter of, can they finally do it this year? I really feel like that's it.
It's a very fair question, and we're going to find out. That's why they play the games, Hunter.
Yeah.
Next week, we will be in the midst. There will have been regular season hockey played by the next time we talk to you guys next Thursday, and we can get on into overreacting after 2 days of the NHL. Hunter and I will talk to you guys next week. Real quick, if you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please take the extra second, leave a 5-star review. If you are on Apple, leave a written review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit a like on the video, hit the alarm bell so you get a notification whenever new content goes live. Subscribe. Leave us a comment. Tell us the order you think the Metro is going to finish in this season. We will talk to you guys next week after there is real NHL hockey played.